Okay, hopefully everybody can see me tonight. Got the camera pointed the right direction. Of course, my name is Kent, and the channel is Bitcoin Artificial Intelligence. And what I want to talk about tonight is I made a video the other night about how big companies, maybe even perhaps Amazon, are going to have to adjust to this new AI world. And some of these companies, it's going to be a lot harder because of the fact that they have a lot of entrenchment with, the world as it is today, and blending with artificial intelligence isn't going to be that easy for some companies, especially big companies like Amazon. And I think a lot of people didn't like that because maybe they got Amazon stock. But anyway, because I had a few people tell me that's not the way it is. That's not the way it's going to be. But this is what I'll tell you. I will tell you that, AI is going to displace a lot of people. It's going to displace a lot of jobs. But that's nothing new. That's been going on for a long, long time. And I will give you an example of that in my own life. I grew up in western Nebraska, actually a little town of Mitchell, Nebraska, which is outside of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Scottsbluff was the big city for us. That's on the western end of the state. If you don't know the state of Nebraska, I think it's about probably about 10,000 people there. But anyway, I grew up in a little town on a farm in western Nebraska. And I was born in 1960, so that makes me 63 years old. And when I grew up, as I was growing up, I saw a very vibrant farming community. When I was going to school, most of my parents were farmers. Every 80 acres had a farmer and maybe a hired hand. And most guys had smaller tractors without cabs on them, without air conditioning. And that was the world I grew up into. That was where I was born into. And of course I grew up, and as I was growing up in the farming community, the biggest thing everybody said was that you got to get big or get out. You got to grow if you're going to be a farmer. You got to get bigger equipment, more expensive equipment, you got to take on more land, and you got to keep going. You got to keep up with innovation, with technology, which at that time was a 100 horsepower tractor, or taking on instead of farming 160 acres, you got to farm 320 or 640 or 1,000, do all that stuff. You got to keep going. So that was the world I grew up in. But as I was growing up, all I ever saw was the farming community diminish and get smaller. The school that I went to an all-rural school. And by the time I was a 10th grader in high school, they had dissolved that school, and we all went to the Mitchell School, which is the city school, a high school in Mitchell, Nebraska. And the school that we grew up with it was all from kindergarten all the way to the 12th grade, was just eliminated because there wasn't enough kids to keep it going anymore. So it just became cost effective to send everybody to the city school. And that's where I finished up at, was the city school. And as I went through all the grades that I was going through, I had less and less kids every year, fewer and fewer kids on the farm. Of course, my parents were farmers, and all they could think about was my dad every year, seeing the bigger tractors, seeing instead of having 6-row equipment, 8-row equipment, instead of 8-row equipment, 12-row equipment. Instead of a 100 horsepower tractor, 150 horsepower tractor, 200 horsepower tractors, 250 horsepower tractors. Instead of a cultivator that was 16, 18 feet, now 22 feet cultivator. So everything just continued to progress. And as the equipment got bigger, the farms got smaller, and fewer people were on the farm. So fast forward, by the time I graduate from college, spent a few years as a stockbroker, I decided I'm going to go back and farm. So I go back and I farm, and of course, all I saw in the 10 years I was a farmer was incredibly decreasing farms, fewer and fewer people farming. I could go up and down the street, the highway that I farmed along, and every year you'd see 3 or 4 people go out of business. It just was inevitable. And usually it was bad crop prices, and then bad weather, whatever it was, but you saw more and more farmers go out of business. And the final year that I farmed, before I went on to school, when I decided I was going to, after putting up with that for a number of years, I was going to be a lawyer, so I went off to law school. But and I never ended up being a lawyer, thank God. But anyway, the final years that I was farming, I knew I was getting ready to go to school, and I knew it was going to be expensive, and I was going to be in school for a few years, so I was trying to really make a push to make some money, to get ahead of the game before I took off with law school. So You know, the last year I remember farming, I farmed almost 1,000 acres. And it was just me and another guy that I had hired, and we had like one tractor. So we had to pretty much keep that tractor going around the clock, you know, just to keep up with the work. Because back then we didn't have GMO corn. We were cultivating our corn, we were plowing our ground, we were doing everything. We had one tractor, 2290 case tractor. That was the only tractor I had. So, you know, we were going around the clock trying to make some money, and I was trying to build a little bit of money up so I could pay for schooling for the next few years. Well, I remember the last year I farmed. By the time I ended up selling all my equipment, you know, paying off the loans to the bank, and doing everything I needed to do, I just paid off my operating loan at the bank. So the way this usually worked is you get out of the bank, you'd have a master loan. You would tell the banker your game plan. Hey, I'm going to farm this many acres. I'm going to have corn, beans, sugar beets. I didn't have any livestock. And then, you know, they would kind of figure out what your expenses were going to be, and then they would lend you money. You know, against basically they put a blanket lien against everything you owned. And then at the end of the year, you would pay it off. Well, I remember farmed almost 1,000 acres, just me and another kid I had hired with me, and we worked our tails off. I mean, I was a young guy then. I was probably in my late 20s, and we just worked our rear ends off. And I was so disappointed at the end of the year that I just barely cleaned up the bank. It was like, I mean, took the last nickel and basically had to go to school, and didn't have any reserves. So I literally saw a vibrant farming community turn from farmers making money, prosperous, buying new pickups every year, buying things to where by the time I left the farm, which was the 80s, which were horrible farming years, you know, you couldn't survive. Even if you were young and you had all the energy in the world, and you know, you could put in long hours and do superhuman things, you still couldn't make any money because the farming community was changing. And it's still to this day is changing. But the people that were stuck in that farming just a few acres and not building equipment and stuff like that, or finding a niche farm, maybe farming non-GMO or something like that, they went out of business. So you had to find a niche farming. You had to do something different, maybe by organic farming or farm different crops that we were farming. But you couldn't farm, you know, the regular commodities, the corn, the GMO corn, you know, the other things that we were farming to make any money. That economy had passed us by. And like I say, by the time I left, you couldn't make any money at all. And I'll tell you a quick story. I had a friend of mine who was a very smart kid. I went to school with him, and he was a smart kid. I mean, he was like the top valedictorian in our class, and he was a really bright kid. And he was a farmer too, farm kid just like me, same age as me. And I remember I was coming up the dirt road right before I quit to go to school, and I saw him one day, and he pulled over to the side, and I pulled over, and we met each other in the middle of the dirt road, no cars coming. And I was talking to him, and I said, you know, how's everything going? And he goes, I haven't cleaned up with the bank for the last 3 years. He goes, I've been carrying my loans forward for the last 3 years. And I remember thinking to myself, if this guy, who was really clever, really smart, really energetic, had good ideas, couldn't farm and make a living at it, there ain't nobody gonna farm and make a living at it, because this kid was a farm kid. His parents were farmers, his grandparents were farmers, he's third generation, fourth generation farmer back in the era I was farming. And he couldn't clean the bank up every year. He was carrying loans forward. I knew it wasn't long for most of the other people. And I haven't been back there in a long time. But I would imagine most of the people that I knew that were my age group that were still farming, aren't farming anymore, because that economy passed them by. Well, that's what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. It's going to pass a lot of people by. What I said the other night is this is the biggest story in our world today, and nobody's covering it. You got a few people out there talking about this, but nobody's talking about it. But obviously, if you're not blending in with artificial intelligence, if you're not using it, if you're not learning about it, if you're not being involved with it, you're gonna get passed by, just like I did on the farm, just like my friend did, just like all the farmers I used to know when I was a kid did. They just got passed by, and there wasn't a safety net for them. You know, they come up with the farm programs and stuff like that. And a lot of people, you know, could kind of squeak by with the farming program, but it was never like it was when I was a kid, when the farmers were very prosperous and they always seemed to have money. You know, like I say, I went to school with a lot of kids. Their parents would have, you know, every year. Well, my parents were the same way. I mean, every year, new pickup, new car, You know, they had money to spend. I always felt very fortunate being a farm kid because I go to school and I was going to school with the city kids, and of course the farm kids always were better off than the city kids. You know, we had cars and we had stuff that the kids in town didn't have. So we always felt very fortunate, but that economy went away. It died. And I think the same thing's going to happen with a lot of people now. So recognize what's happening, understand what's happening, and use it. I mean, AI by itself isn't going to do it. AI and a human being is. You look at, if you want to think of the ultimate success story, look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk was an innovator of artificial intelligence. In fact, ChatGPT, OpenAI, was originally his idea or his company, and then of course it got sold out to Microsoft, and of course they're the ones that have ChatGPT number 4 now, which is learning faster. In fact, they say it's at almost Einstein IQ, and if in another few months it's going to exceed Einstein IQ. So you know, you got in a few months from, you know, ChatGPT 3 to 4 now to Einstein, and so what's it going to be in a year? It's going to be incredible. So it's going to take a human being and AI to make it. And if you're just trying to do it without AI, you're not going to make it. So that's the way it is. That's the world we're living in today, and everybody's at risk. Everybody, including the largest, most successful companies in our world today, as I pointed out with Amazon, they're all at risk. Everybody is at risk because of this new innovation called artificial intelligence. So, like I say, I've seen this happen in my lifetime. Once, several times, with things innovating and people just, well, it happened with the internet too. And it's happened to happen. It's happened with Walmart. It's happened with all the companies that now Amazon has wiped out. All the big box stores. I mean, I like to watch the YouTube videos of another big box store has gone out of business. You know, all the different companies that have gone out of business. And a lot of it's because they haven't been able to keep up with Amazon, because Amazon's been able to retail at a less expensive price, at less profit margin than if you own the building and you have to have the inventory and you got to have the stuff on the shelf and you got to have the employees at the counter and you got to have people, you know, stocking shelves every night. If you don't have that, it's so much easier, so much cheaper, and that's why Amazon's been able to be prosperous. But there's just going to be a day very soon where Amazon's overhead's going to kill them, because artificial intelligence is going to do the job of a lot of people that are working at Amazon. But Amazon cannot get rid of those people. You know, they can't just all of a sudden just eliminate jobs. You know, they're still going to have to meet their obligations. You know, they have people that probably have contracts. They have companies they have contracts with that they probably don't need with the artificial intelligence world, or probably could be duplicated with artificial intelligence. So the world's changing, and it's been changing ever since I was born, and it's probably been changing since the beginning of industry and business. So pay attention, because things are changing. I appreciate you watching.